Oh, I don't listen to the podcast. I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Yeah, I think you're mistaking yourself with Ruchit.
Ruchit's not even on the podcast.
Yeah, we fired Ruchit. No, Ruchit's on vacation.
In Portugal.
In Portugal, where I'll be in a few days, weeks, months, something like that. Years.
Hi everybody. This is my this is NPR's Eat My Shorts, and we have with us on the phone Tom Jacob. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Jacob.
Okay. And we're very excited to have Tom with us on the phone. We wish we could have had him in the studio, but there was a small snafu. But anyway, my understanding is that Tom Jacob watched the Jim Comey hearings. Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, I watched all of them. Well, I heard them in the background while I was working.
Oh my God. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm still here. So, I got that going for me.
What was that like to have those hearings on in the background while you were working? I mean, what was going through your head?
I felt they were kind of uneventful, really. I mean, there wasn't too much that was added from the testimony that wasn't already sort of in his statement, at least by reference. I think there were a couple of tidbits that we did not know until we heard him testify. One, so for background, he testified about the statement, the conversations that he had in private with Donald Trump, our current president. And he said that Donald Trump had asked him, in effect, if not by his express words, to stop investigating the Russia connection, to stop investigating Flynn, because Flynn is a good guy. One of the things that I think we learned that we did not know before he testified was that Comey was the person who leaked all of this information to the New York Times. And I think when we were talking about it earlier, there was a question of whether that was legal or illegal or whatnot. But my understanding from Comey's testimony is that he intentionally created the contemporaneous records of his conversations with Donald Trump to include only unclassified information, such that the Trump administration could not suppress that information from making it into the public sphere, basically.
I'm actually just being handed a printout from the Washington Post. Matt Zapotsky, he wrote an article saying that a lot of people think that Jim Comey didn't do any illegal leaks.
No, yeah. I from his, if we were to take his testimony at face value, I don't think he did do any illegal leaks because, it's not illegal to give unclassified, not confidential information to the press or to any third party, right? In fact, I would say that the public has a right to know. You have, under the Freedom of Information Act, you could request that information if there's not some other bar preventing that information from being released. There's a presumption that what your government does is public record.
Well, it also seems to me that all of the information that Comey has released to the public, either through placing stories in the press or in his testimony, all of that information is information that is unclassified, and reflects his own personal experience. How could any former government employee ever write a memoir, for example? Yeah. If Comey couldn't release the sort of information that he has.
Yeah. That's true. One of the interesting parts of the testimony, though, was what was classified, right? There were several times where he was asked a question and he had to answer with something like, that's a question I don't think I can answer in an open setting, right? So let me give you some examples of the questions that he was asked. Tom Cotton, the Republican senator from Arizona, asked him, let's turn our attention to the underlying activity at issue here, Russia's hacking into those emails and releasing them, and the allegations of collusion. Do you believe Donald Trump colluded with Russia? Comey. That's a question I don't think I should answer in an open setting. Kamala Harris, Democratic Senator from California. Are you aware of any efforts by the Trump campaign officials or associates of the campaign to hide their communication with Russian officials through encrypted communications or other means? Comey. I have to give you the same answer, Senator, referring to his previous answer that he couldn't answer that in an open setting. And, of course, John McCain, Republican Senator from Arizona. Are you aware of anything that would lead you to believe that information exists that could coerce members of the administration or blackmail the administration? Comey. That's not a question I can answer, Senator, referring to his previous answer that he can't answer it in an open setting. Basically, by my count, he did that 16 times. And, the best analogy I have is, in the criminal setting, when you take the Fifth Amendment, right? In a criminal setting, when you take the Fifth Amendment right, not to incriminate yourself, that cannot be used against you, right? In the civil setting, however, if you choose not to testify on a matter, invoking your Fifth Amendment, that can be used against you. So I'm wondering, what is this testimony more analogous to? Are we supposed to take the implication that, where there's smoke, there's fire?
I think just from what I've read about the hearings, it seems that in particular Senator Harris's questions were designed to elicit the sort of that precise sort of response to sound out the scope of topics that sort of where there was something meaningful to discuss that couldn't be discussed in open settings, right? So if these answers, if the answers were simply no, it seems that Comey could have just said no, right?
Yes.
And so for him to have any answer but no is itself meaningful. And I think that the analogy to the Fifth Amendment is actually very meaningful. So that the idea that Tom was talking about is that in a criminal trial, if someone pleads the Fifth, if someone refuses to answer the question based on the right against self-incrimination, that the jury is not allowed to infer guilt from that statement. And the whole point being that the right against self-incrimination is totally meaningless if by exercising the right you incriminate yourself, right? And the only reason we need to have such a doctrine is that it seems so obvious that if someone were to invoke the right against self-incrimination, it's because there is something incriminating not to say, right? Like the whole thing is sort of self-referencing. And so I think that Comey did it seems obvious from Comey's testimony that he's very mindful of the public perception of the situation, that he said that he leaked through his friends to the press stories, in particular to cause there to be a special prosecutor appointed. And so he has admitted that he, one, has intended by his actions to influence the course of the investigation, and two, it seems very clear that he has opinions about what the conclusions of the investigation are likely to be. And so for him to have questions that he refuses to answer, I think you could place that in a pattern of conduct in intending to influence the course of the investigation by indicating that facts exist that he's not willing to discuss.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, he's being very clear as to the reason he's not willing to discuss it is it's classified, right? And the two things about that. First, I noticed that's what Kamala Harris was doing. But if you look at the transcript and the hearing, hers weren't the most damning questions. I thought the most damning questions came from Senator Cotton, whether he believed Donald Trump was colluding with Russia. And I think probably Cotton hoped to get an answer, something like no, but Comey responded, that's not a question I can answer in an open setting. And John McCain, who asked him if there was any blackmail out there on members of the administration. And that was also a question he couldn't answer publicly.
So just something about Tom Cotton. This is a graduate of the Harvard Law School asking a question on cross-examination to which he doesn't know the answer. And I guess that's like
it's totally a Yale thing to do,
I mean, it's just like, come on, dude. Come on. Hey, come on.
Yeah. Hold on. The other thing on that, the Fifth Amendment analogy is, as I said earlier, like the in the civil context, if you are called to testify and you invoke your right under the Fifth Amendment, that can be used against you, right? Setting aside, any criminal ramifications on Donald Trump personally, I think because we're dealing with a, matter of the public sphere, right? Like we're dealing with the commander in chief, president of the United States. I would analogize this to the higher standard, set in favor of disclosure or in favor of the public, such that it should be used against him, right? Like the public it has the right to ask the follow-up questions. Is there something to this? Is there something to whether or not Donald Trump colluded with Russia, for example, per Cotton, or whether there's blackmail on the administration out there per McCain?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. One of the other things is that since the testimony doesn't seem to have had any revelations that we didn't already know, something that seems more interesting is that in this context of testimony that was from certain perspectives. From a certain perspective, nothing really new happened. So these senators had who were asking the questions sort of had a high risk, low reward situation, and it was interesting to me to see which senators were lining up to support Trump and which weren't. So Nate Silver made a comment in the 538 Live blog of the event that Rubio's questions in particular seemed like someone who had done the calculation and decided that the Trump coalition was going to be necessary for his political future, right? That on the other hand, you have other senators like Senator Burr, who seems to have been played it down the middle, or someone like John McCain, who just sort of doesn't like Hillary Clinton very much, right? I mean, you could see the sort of the personal calculations of each of the senators on display much more than you could see. Which I guess I'm saying is that was more informative than what Comey himself may have said.
Well, on the point of John McCain, did you get an opportunity to listen to his questioning at all, or after?
Oh, actually, okay. Let me find that right now. Okay, so McCain Comey question.
Yeah,
here I'll give you my live reaction.
Watch it on YouTube.
Watch it on YouTube. Okay, here. Let me paint the scene for you. Theater of the mind. It's loading. Yeah. Okay, I'm watching. It's a split screen view. John McCain on the left, Jim Comey on the right.
It might be helpful to watch it at 2-speed.
I'm gonna turn this up to 2-speed. I'm clicking on the gear icon to change the setting speeds. I'm gonna set this to 1.5x. John McCain is still talking. He's talking about Hillary Clinton. Jim Comey is answering the question. A lot of people don't know this about Jim Comey. He's about 6'8". So Jim Comey is saying over and over again that the investigation into Clinton was completed. John McCain seems confused. He's got a look of befuddlement. He's looking side to side. Jim Comey also looks puzzled. Not quite senile, just sort of perplexed.
I think everyone's puzzled at this point.
Jim Comey's answering the question. Now, Jim Comey's wearing a white pinpoint collar shirt. Collar points are much nearer to each other than John McCain's shirt, with a widespread collar, projecting confidence. He's the alpha gorilla in the Senate, the widest collared maverick. John McCain seems confused about how some investigations may be completed while other investigations are not completed. And Jim Comey... Okay, this video is 8 minutes long. When do I stop?
You can stop whenever.
Okay, so John McCain is a sleepy grandpa.
Yeah.
And Jim Comey is a big, tall giant of a man.
They're both confused. John McCain perhaps more so.
John McCain, I actually read a quote. He said after the hearing that he shouldn't stay up so late watching Diamondback games before hearings. which is like not a good look, I guess. Like it's sort of at the twice, like in two ways, acknowledges one, that his questions were poor, and two, that he didn't do a very good job of being ready for, say, one of the most important jobs that a senator does.
Yeah. You know, as an aside, John McCain's questioning of Jim Comey may be the best argument for term limits.
I mean, John McCain is the best argument for having different people move to Arizona and vote.
Yeah, I guess.
Like, think about it. Okay, so I mean, what are our conclusions? It sounds like Rubio's definitely going to run for president again. It sounds like John McCain needs to go take a nap. It sounds like Jim Comey, while seriously having mishandled the Clinton email investigation, also seems to have an explanation that you can sympathize with, if not agree with, for why he did what he did. That there was that Russian piece of agitprop about there's about how the when Bill Clinton met with Loretta Lynch on the plane, that they had actually had substantive discussions about the investigation, and there were Russian sources that were planting fake stories or fake intelligence about that, and then Jim Comey read the fake intelligence and knew it was fake, but still feared that it would leak, and so he went ahead and tried to get out ahead of the story. And you sort of I mean, there's this whole thing here where, like, each decision that Comey has made, you don't necessarily have to agree with, but I think that he has done a good job of presenting himself as someone who is sort of thoughtful and reasonable and serious about his job, even if he does so in a way that, in fact, turned out to be fairly derelict. I guess what I'm saying is that Jim Comey is someone who has made tons of bad decisions, but for seemingly sympathetic reasons.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think that sort of his central role in now seems to be the last hope for our democracy. You know, I don't like his central role in that shouldn't like whitewash things he's done in the past, but at the same time, he does seem like someone who is very serious and earnest.
Yeah, I think he did a good job at this hearing of presenting himself very much in terms of I'm here to tell you what I know, and I'm not going to draw any conclusions. So he does the classic sort of lawyer trick where he makes an argument without expressly making an argument, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I were to tell you, look, last night I went to bed. I looked out my window before going to bed, and I saw no snow on the ground. This morning, I woke up. I saw snow on the ground. I'm not going to tell you whether it snowed. That's not my place. I'll leave that to you to draw the conclusion. You know, that's in effect what he was doing, right? Like he was arguing without arguing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. You know, overall, I guess it's fine. I don't know. Do you have any super hot takes? Is there anything like super hot to say about it?
Well, I think other than the things that we talked about, no. The only other small aside is, this is just kind of funny. Senator Reich, is that how you say his name? Richt. Richt. R-I-S-C-H. The Republican senator from Idaho.
Wait. Oh my God. Oh God. Sorry, I did a bad job. That was Richt is the former head coach of the University of Georgia Bulldogs. You're talking about Senator Risch, Senator Rich, right?
Senator Rich. Okay, let's just start over.
Rich.
You'll edit this.
Okay.
Maybe. Senator Rich, the Republican senator from Idaho, had this long line of questioning about the specific words that Donald Trump used when he attempted to influence Comey's investigation and shut it down. You know, Comey quoted him as saying, "I hope that you find it in your heart to no longer pursue this line of investigation against Flynn. Flynn's a good guy." That type of language, right? And he was like, "Well, do you know any case where a obstruction charge, or for that matter, any criminal offense has been brought where someone just hoped for an outcome? It's not illegal to have dreams, is it?"
What did Comey say?
Comey's responses, I don't know well enough to answer. He did a very good job of bringing it back to the totality of the circumstances, right? Like a good witness. He was like, look, my complaint isn't only with the words he used, but it was the entire circumstances and the implications that he made, right? So two things about this. First, Adam Liptek immediately found an Eighth Circuit opinion
I saw
affirming a obstruction of justice enhancement based on using words like "I hope you don't do that." You know what I mean? Like I hope. And then the other thing is, Face the Nation John Dickerson pointed out that during his interview of Donald Trump, the famous interview where Donald Trump just basically shuts the interview down and awkwardly stands on the other side of the room and waits for John Dickerson to leave. I think we talked about this in an earlier episode, right? So John Dickerson said, look, when I was interviewing him, one of the questions that I had, one of the topics of discussion that he had with Trump is the power of the Oval Office and how just getting someone alone with the president in the Oval Office itself has a level of intimidation. And Dickerson said Trump acknowledged this power of the Oval Office and said he expressly uses that power on, counterparties, basically. Trump had a line.
Interesting.
And so like this was before the whole Comey leaks happened, right? Like, so if, here we have a president who has admitted knowing how powerful and influential getting someone alone in the Oval Office and telling him to do something is, and then him just a few days later going and having Comey alone in the Oval Office or alone at dinner in the White House, telling him that he hopes Comey finds it in his heart to drop the investigation against his good friend, General Flynn.
General Flynn. You want to talk about the UK election?
That was another thing that happened this weekend. Right?
Yeah, so the UK had a general election. So here, I'll set up the story for you. So the Conservative Party, or as you may hear me call them, the Bad Party.
The Tories?
The Tories. They're bad. I mean, they're fine. They're pretty bad. Okay, here's a little bit about the state of U.S. politics. Jim Messina, the former Obama campaigner, guess which party he was working for in the 2017 UK general election?
Who?
I asked you to guess, and then you didn't do the thing I asked you to do.
Yeah, that happens.
So he was working for Theresa May. So Theresa May is presently the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. She was the Home Secretary under David Cameron. David Cameron resigned after the Brexit vote a year ago. Mm-hmm. And Theresa May was elected leader of the Conservatives and therefore the Prime Minister. She decided in May to have a snap election. And the reason why is that the Conservative Party had a very slim majority. The majority was only about 12 votes. And so she, out of 600 and something, she decided that it would be helpful to her, and the pitch she made to the public was that it would be helpful to her in negotiating the British exit from the European Union if she were to have a larger majority in the parliament. And so she called for a snap election. Now, in the UK, you can have a snap election on agreement of a supermajority of parliament. So the Prime Minister will submit to Parliament, we should have an election. A supermajority of Parliament says yes, and then they dissolve the Parliament and have another election. And you can do that at any time. You're not waiting on a fixed schedule. So her hope was that at the time, the Conservatives were polling very well publicly and Labour was polling very poorly, and she thought that she was going to command some sort of crushing majority as a result of the election. The election happens. Now it turns out that the Conservative majority is gone. They are the largest party, but not a majority. They need the vote of votes from 10 Democratic Unionists in order to secure a majority of the votes in the parliament. Tom, let me paint a picture for you of what the Democratic Union Party is. and you stop me when you find the nearest analogy in American politics. Are you ready?
Okay.
So the Democratic Unionists are they're in Northern Ireland. They're a far right, a very conservative political party in Northern Ireland. A lot of the politics in Northern Ireland devolves into sort of pro-union and nationalist politics. So the nationalist parties want to separate from the UK, and the unionist parties want to remain in the United Kingdom. The Democratic Unionists are the most conservative unionist party. They, among their prominent elected members are some young Earth creationists. They have continued to block the legalization of same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland. It's the only jurisdiction in the UK where they don't have same-sex marriage.
These folks sound like Texans.
They're hardline anti-abortion.
So Texans?
I'm sorry?
These folks sound like Texans.
Wow, it's just sort of surprising to me that a party that is considered an extremely right-wing party by European standards. Now you're saying that just sounds like Texas.
Yeah,
it's pretty rough. Anyway, so Theresa May is wildly irresponsible on this for a couple of reasons. One, the sectarian issues in Ireland, falling on the Democratic Unionists are Presbyterian, so they're very hardline, extremely religious Protestants, and so by propping up one of the Irish political parties over the other, by folding them into the ruling coalition in the British Parliament, it shows the government of England officially picking a side in these sort of sectarian issues. It also is just like not a good sign when sort of the votes that give you your majority are in many ways the most influential votes. So, for example, in crafting the American Health Care Act, one of Paul Ryan's problems was that the House Freedom Caucus was larger than the marginal majority that the Republicans had in the House. That is, if the House Freedom Caucus did not support a bill, then the bill could not pass, right? And so you end up with a coalition that's held hostage by its most extreme votes, right? If the DUP were to withdraw support from a budget, then the government would fail and it would cause a snap election to occur. And so the Democratic Unionists have an extraordinary amount of power in the government, which should be terrifying to anyone who sort of supports the rights of women and minorities, religious minorities in the United Kingdom. And so one of the prominent Scottish members of Parliament, who happens one of the prominent conservative members of Parliament from Scotland, who happens to be gay, said that she went to Theresa May and sought assurances that the Democratic Unionists would not, would not impose sort of these restrictive policies on the United Kingdom as a condition for joining the coalition. And Theresa May said, yeah, sure. But Theresa May is also, as we have seen, not the best judge of what may occur in the future. So, I mean, who knows what's going on? Just as an example, the Conservative Party and the Unionists have been unable to commence their negotiations because the Unionists do not negotiate on Sundays. They don't conduct any political business on Sundays. And so for them to begin holding meetings today, they said would not be useful because they just have to break on Sunday. They might as well wait till Monday to get started. Meanwhile, a country hangs in the balance, right? Like we're a period of days away from the commencement of negotiations with the European Union about the British exit. And so the whole thing is just like comical. The other point here is that Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of the Labour Party, and he has been compared to Bernie Sanders. I mean, he's like, in the 70s, he really does seem to have been a real deal socialist, and he is constantly derided in the British press. and the public opinion of him was very negative going into the beginning of the election. And what happened is that during the election, Corbyn was able to make much more direct appeals to people, and the advertisements that they played were really touching. They had one where and we should put links to these in the show notes. They had one where it was a father and his daughter reminiscing about old photos. And he says, oh, like, here's me going to college. And she says, oh, well, I get to go to college. And he says, yes, but it'll be much more expensive. And she's like, well, why don't I get all the benefits that you used to have? And he says, I voted for Theresa May. And then and then at the end of the ad, she turns to him and says, do you hate me? And he says, obviously. I mean, the ads are like truly like cutting. There's another one called We Demand. And it really is like a Workers of the World Unite sort of manifesto. It's sort of, there's a lot of like socialist imagery in it. I mean, this is like a sort of direct to the peel, left wing, populist sort of campaign that Bernie Sanders ran, and that people have, I mean, myself included, have sort of said, would not be electable in the modern times. And it actually turns out that, Jeremy Corbyn was able to win, I think it was like 29 seats, more than the Labour Party had won in the 2015 election. And it sort of just goes to show that the conventional wisdom about what sort of politics are electable in the world, that sort of conventional wisdom can and will be mistaken. It's sort of a good sign for leftists. The sort of, I mean, if you're like left wing enough to distinguish leftists from liberals, this is sort of a heartening moment for you. Just also some like brief observations about how good a Westminster system is compared to the U.S. One, elections are fast. So this election was called on May 5th. They called the election, had the campaign, held the election. We now know the results of the election. And all of this happened during the time between the first and second round of voting in Georgia's 6th congressional district.
Mm-hmm. Why are elections faster in the UK than here?
Because they're much more reasonable people. Because I think that they...
I mean, that's a non-answer, right?
Okay, so I think there are actually two answers. One of them is sort of cultural, and I think the other one is constitutional. Mm-hmm. So, in the United States is sort of an exceptional country when it comes to freedom of expression. And I think there are positives and negatives to this. I mean, obviously, you would say that freedom of expression is important and ought to be guaranteed. But when it comes to election laws, there are other jurisdictions that place much more of an emphasis on securing sort of the appearance of propriety and securing public confidence in the electoral system. And so one of the ways that that's manifest is that the UK has strict rules on when it is possible to campaign. And so whereas in the United States, you can announce your candidacy for office at any time. Donald Trump announced his candidacy for the president in June of 2015. The first Republican primary votes weren't even held until June of until the winter, like the first few months of 2016, right? And so there's a period of like 6 months where the entire country was participating in the spectacle of this election when there was no actual vote in sight. Mm-hmm. There were televised debates and breathless media coverage. Yeah. In the UK, that all is forbidden. Right, in order to ensure the orderly functioning of government, there is a different calculus in the give and take between the freedom of expression and in securing the appearance of respectability and propriety in the electoral mm-hmm. process. So I think that is sort of the constitutional answer, and I also think there's a cultural answer, which is just that a lot of the norms that have sort of eroded away in American politics, basically, I guess beginning in like the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of those norms about how people conduct themselves in public life have been maintained in other countries.
So it's only a matter of time that they become like us. That's what you're saying.
I mean, it depends on how much influence the Democratic Unionists have. That's like I think that's like an interesting point, right? Like there are jurisdictions where they have made the decision for themselves that these sort of faster elections are better overall. An interesting note is that once an election period begins, Parliament is dissolved. There's no period where the Parliament is in session during an election, right? Which means that parliamentarians can't use their offices or their official duties as part of their like election, part of their election strategy. So I think that's an interesting point. The second point is that elections happen often. The government can call an election whenever it needs to. So a parliament can't last longer than 5 years. But other than that, you can have an election whenever you need to in order to achieve whatever it is you're doing. So there are things called votes of confidence. So for example, passing a budget. If a government is unable to get a budget through parliament, then there is no confidence there's no confidence in the government, and it is appropriate and expected to have an election at that point. And so, whereas here, you can have a presidency like, say, George Bush's, which in the last year and a half, when his approval ratings were abysmal and it was dragging down his party, and the Democrats had taken the Congress, and it was fairly clear that they were going to take the presidency. And nevertheless, there was a period of like a year and a half when folks just didn't get much done because you were just waiting for the next president. In a Westminster system, you would just go ahead and figure out who the next president would be. You would just go do that right then. Two more points on this. One, the primaries for prime minister candidates happened a long, long time before the actual election. So Theresa May became leader of the Conservative Party in July of 2016. Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party in September of 2015. You don't really have these sort of messy primary campaigns immediately before the election, right? So you don't have this sort of never-ending spectacle of getting Democrats, in a circular firing squad and Republicans in a circular firing squad and seeing who can come out the least scathed in order to run a general election. Parties work that out much less publicly and much farther ahead of time. And then finally, leaders can only come from the largest party in parliament for the most part. I mean, whoever can form a government, that government by definition has the support of a majority of the votes in parliament, right? Because if the government can't get a budget through or certain other confidence votes by a majority vote in parliament, then the government won't continue. So definitionally, there isn't a problem like what Obama had for 6 years of his presidency, where he didn't have control of the part of the legislature, and there was, it cuts both ways, right? So you sort of there's the minority party has less opportunity to prevent legislation from passing, but also when a government comes into power, it enacts its agenda, and it becomes very clear if things are going well or poorly, whose fault that is, right? Whereas when you have a divided government like the United States, then the Democrats can say, oh, it's the Republican House, and the Republican House can say, oh, it's the Democratic president, and it's much less salient to the people what actually is whose fault. So basically, this is like a very long overdone speech about the UK election is very good because it was a better result than expected for Labour. Theresa May has shown herself not to be particularly capable and not to resign the premiership. The Conservative Party is now held hostage to evangelical religious extremists who are embroiled in a sectarian struggle in the far top left corner of the country. So she did a great job in strengthening the position of our country going into some serious negotiations with the European Union. And we should celebrate Theresa May. Credit to her for doing a great job. Everyone is pleased. Sounds good.
Cool. Should we do sidebars now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you want to do your sidebar, or are you excited to find out about Ken M?
I'll do my sidebar.
Okay.
So my sidebar is Giant of the Senate by Al Franken. Usually these sort of political autobiographies are like really lame. For example, Elizabeth Warren, super lame. Elizabeth Warren, good senator, bad autobiography. So the Al Franken one, actually very good. And if you want like a sneak peek of what sort of stories you can expect, here's a nice little anecdote. Al Franken writes, I met my wife Franny during our first week of college. When our daughter Thomason was 6 years old, her first grade teacher assigned the kids to write about how their parents met. This was before parents met on Tinder or Grindr for that matter. I told her, I met Mommy at a freshman mixer. That's a dance. And I saw her across the room organizing a group of girls to leave. I liked the way she was taking charge. She was beautiful. So I asked her to dance, and we had a dance. And then I got her a ginger ale, and then I escorted her to her dorm room and asked her for a date. My daughter wrote it this way. My dad asked my mom to a dance, bought her a drink, and took her home. Anyway, I thought that was like a very pleasant...
Yeah. So
it's like a good autobiography. I'm about a quarter of the way in, and it's like pretty good.
Do you think Al Franken's going to run for president?
I hope so. Al Franken's good, dude. Al Franken does a good job.
Yeah. I got a photo with Al Franken that I want to share with you at some point.
Yeah, text me.
Okay, I will.
Like later or now, whatever.
So my sidebar is Ken M. Ken M is is the comedian Kenneth McCarthy, right? And he is a famous internet troll. He goes on various websites, in the news, like when you have news articles in the comment section, and he writes like just random comments, or he goes on like the Facebook page of Jimmy Dean Sausage, for example, and writes comments like, I was supposed to get a free sample of your sausage product, but they ran out. And Jimmy Dean replies, Jimmy Dean Sausage. So this is the corporate entity that is replying on Facebook to Ken. Hi, Ken. Thanks for getting in touch. Can you please send us a direct message located under a cover photo with your contact information so we can help? Ken M replies, thank you. Please send the sausage to 3250 Below Road, Pensacola 32526. Jimmy Dean. Hi, Ken M. Can you send us a direct message? Send us a direct message that's located under our cover photo. Ken M. In brackets. Please put this as a direct message. End brackets. Well, they were handing out pieces of your sausage at Walmart, but they ran out when I was next in line, and some folks took more than one piece.
Okay, this is pretty funny.
No, it goes on. It's pretty good, and check the show notes because you really got to like read and click the thing. Another thing that read and click some of these examples. Another example I have is Good Housekeeping published an article called "Good Housekeeping Research Institute Picks the Best Juicers for 2013." Ken M. Another machine that will put hardworking in all caps, Americans out of a job. Thanks, Obama. Lori, responding to Ken M. I knew if I went far enough down here, I'd find some dumb jerk who just has to blame Obama. Idiot. Get a hand juicer if you're a purist. Ken M. Grandson is studying to be a professional juicer and now has his degree and it will be worthless.
Madness. All right. Well, I think we did it. I think we did a very successful episode without Rujit. Rest in peace, Rujit. I hope he finds fulfillment in the afterlife.
Yeah. Rujit actually, he says that he was too not hungover, he jet lagged to come on the podcast, but the entire podcast he's been texting us things to say. I'll leave it to you, listeners, as to the credibility of one Rujit Shah.
Yeah, he's no Jim Comey, that's for sure.